Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about Python programming. Python programming, as we all know, it's a multi-paradigm programming language. It supports object-oriented programming as well. Today we are going to learn the concepts of object-oriented programming languages, in particular Python. Now, before we go into what object-oriented programming is, let's look into the basic concepts of it. So, in other words, it's basically interactions between two objects, and that helps us develop software applications. So, when we want to know about object-oriented programming, there are a few concepts that you need to be familiar with. So, the first one is the obvious one, object. So, think about, in a real world, when I say the word object, what comes into your mind? So, let's look around. Maybe we can see chair, table, and in a classroom, student. And we can go on, because everywhere we see, it is considered as an object. So, let's take this as an example of an object, and we will consider the attributes, or rather the properties and the methods. So, when we consider a student, what comes into your mind when I say what are the properties of a student? So, the basic properties of a student is first name. So, the student will have a last name, and what else? Say the registration number or your student ID. Likewise, and also when we are developing softwares, when we think about the properties, we always focus on the particulars of the student. Now, we don't go into the Facebook account or any other unnecessary things that is not necessary for developing the software. We don't include in it. So, the basic importance we include in this property, or rather the attributes. So, now let's look into the behavior. In other words, methods. So, what does a student do? So, a student, he or she can enroll in a course. He can also drop the course. Likewise, there are so many methods, or rather the behavior a student has to do. So, likewise, we can go on classifying for the attributes and the behavior for all these objects. Okay, now that we have covered what an object is, let's look into what a class is. A class is a user-defined prototype or a blueprint or even a template that will help us build a particular type of object. So, a student can be a class, and these can be the properties or attributes of that particular student in the student class, and then the methods again inside this class. So, now that we have looked into the basic concepts, now let's move into the most general one. So, we have inheritance. So, please note that there is no particular order as such. So, we have inheritance. When we look at inheritance, let's look into a basic example. So, you have, imagine a bicycle. Okay. So, a bicycle may have subclasses. So, here you can have mountain bike. Here you can have tandem bike, And then here you can have push bike. So this we consider to be the parent class, and these are considered to be the subclasses or the child class. Now imagine a bicycle will have a basic properties that a child class will also have. So the bicycle, say, will have 2 wheels. Likewise, we can say this could be the properties, like the ones which we discussed before. This will be the 2 wheels, and the method could be cycling. So when it comes to inheritance, you don't have to implement, or you don't have to specify the properties and the methods for all these subclasses, because these two are rather common. So we can save time without implementing these or duplicating the code of these for all 3. So what are the properties and methods? So what comes under these things, these subclasses? The properties and the methods are usually that is not common to others. So for instance, we can think about speed or resistance. So when you have a mountain bike, you can think about the speed and the resistance. And for methods, we can think about maximizing the speed or increasing the resistance. So anyone who is an expert on bicycles will obviously know the details, but for now let's keep it this way. Likewise, we can use the properties and the methods specifying for each and every child class. So this is the basic idea of inheritance. Now let's look into the next concept, polymorphism. The definition of this is that a task can be performed in many ways. So let me give you an example. Think of an animal example. Say you have a cat and a dog, and imagine they share the same method name. But in reality, obviously they don't speak, but they do perform separate functions. A cat speaks, but it says meow. A dog says woof. So using the same method name, we have achieved 2 ways of doing the task. So this is the basic understanding of what polymorphism is. Polymorphism can be achieved in 2 ways. The first one is overloading. So this is basically you have the same method name, but you can pass in different input parameters. So again, overloading is you can have the same name, but you can have different input parameters. Now let's look into overriding. Overriding is the manipulation of the function or methods in the child class. So of methods in the child class. So usually overloading is achieved in compile time and overriding is achieved in runtime. Now that you all have a basic understanding of what inheritance and polymorphism is, let's move on to the next concept, abstraction. Okay. So now we are going to talk about abstraction. This is an important concept. Basically what it does is, it hides the detailed information and you can just see the outside. So let's look at an example. Imagine you are having a telephone conversation and you don't know what happens inside it, how the processes are, how the telecommunication is being wired. We don't know that part, but we are only interested in the outside, how a telephone call is made and how both two people converse. Let's look at another example. An example of a car. So a car, we only see the outside. So we see that a car has 4 doors and then you have a beautiful color, but whatever that is happening inside, the engine and everything is covered. So that is called information hiding. And this is very important when it comes to security purposes. So this is abstraction. So let me write the important points so that you will have an understanding. So it's information hiding. So we were talking about a car example. So basically we are only focusing on the outer and not the internal details. Now, since we have looked into abstraction, let's move on to encapsulation. So now we are going to talk about encapsulation, the final concept. So this one is where you have data, imagine all the data, and you are putting it in different units. Think about a capsule. Now, when you are given a prescription, imagine you have a capsule. So in a capsule, all the medicinal properties, like all the medicinal, the chemicals are inside, but they are in a closed unit. So it's basically wrapping up the data. So that's called encapsulation. And this in Python could be achieved by getters and setters methods. So this is basically wrapping up data and putting it into a single unit. Now I hope you have the basic understanding of what an object, classes, and also the concepts that is related to object-oriented programming is. So we looked into inheritance, then polymorphism, we talked about abstraction and encapsulation. I hope you all have an understanding of what object-oriented programming is. Now let's look into how we can achieve this, at least part of it, in Python program. So far, we looked into the object-oriented concepts such as inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, and encapsulation. Today, we are going to look into how, at least part of it, we can apply it to the Python program. So now, this is the Python programming that we have. So in the beginning of the lecture, I discussed about student being an object. I'm going to take that as an example and name my class as student. And then I have declared a variable known as student count. You have to pay attention to the indentation in Python as it plays an important role. So when you look into the class, I have left a tab space to declare my variable, and then another space from my class to talk about the methods. So in this method, it's actually a special method. It's the constructor which has 2 underscores beginning of the init and 2 underscores after. Also, we have this parameter which is name and registration ID. Let's talk about what self is. Self means it's an object reference referencing the object itself. For instance, we have self.name referencing to the name, and then we have self.registration ID referencing to the registration ID itself. We have the student count, which is a counter. Maybe we can count the number of students present in the class. And let's move into the blue color, that is the normal method. So in the normal method, we are displaying the information of the student. So here we are going to print the name of the student. Again, we have to call in the name, and then we are going to display the registration number. So again, we have to call in the registration ID in order for us to print the name and the registration ID of that particular student. I hope you have an understanding how object-oriented concepts can be applied in Python program. Thank you.